You're listening to another episode of the Stoic Squeeze podcast. I got my co-host Lewis with me today. How you doing, Lewis?
What's up?
All right, and our guest today is Cory Camp. And quick little introduction on how we met Cory. So about a year ago when Lewis and I were starting this podcast, he convinced me to start a TikTok. And he's like, TikTok is good because of X and X reasons. Like, they got good algorithms when you're trying to promote a podcast or something. It's definitely like a good way. And at the time, I was only on Instagram, and the only thing I knew about TikTok is I'd seen it a few years before with a bunch of younger people that I work with, and I just made fun of them relentlessly and just basically talked about this is why the world's going to trash and no one can focus. And now I spend about an hour a day posting TikTok videos. And so anyways, Lewis sends me a link to Cory Camp's page, and he is doing a full immersion in an ice bath that he built. And I'm like, yeah, we need to get this guy on the podcast. This is really cool. And for those of you who don't know anything about cold exposure or breath work or anything, I suggest like starting off with Wim Hof. And there's a lot of like resources out there, but I think at this point he's one of the most famous. And I first learned about Wim Hof about, I want to say like 8 or 9 years ago, listening to him on a podcast. And I would tell everybody about this guy, and everybody I told, including Lewis, would be like, yeah, this is nonsense. This is a joke. Like, this is fake. There's a lot of scam artists out there.
That's because you were the source.
Correct.
So, yeah. If it came from someone like Cory, I probably would have believed him like right away. So.
But yeah, without further ado, we have looks like another cold expert, Cory Camp, and yeah, thank you for coming on the podcast, Cory, and welcome.
I appreciate both of you guys. We got the siren right on time, going right by.
Perfect intro music.
Exactly.
Yeah, that was great intro music. Yeah.
No, thank you for having me. I just want to point out the obvious. Being out in LA, it's a little bit easier to get into the cold immersion stuff because it's like 70 degrees today. It's probably
that's actually the opposite. We probably have a better opportunity because we could just go walk outside, and we're in like the land of lakes, more or less, Wisconsin. So if we were really hardcore like you, we got lots of opportunity. That's the cool thing about it is I tell people like, and you could go into all the benefits and how you learned about it, but it's free. Like cold showers, like all this stuff. And obviously, taking it to the level that you do and whatever, it's pretty awesome, dude. Like honestly, we're jealous and it's already put ideas in my head. So hopefully, I've been talking about this for a while, and I'll let you talk, but hopefully by this time next year, I'll be full-fledged into it with you, Cory. So, anyways.
Let's go. I mean, you guys have way more lakes than I have out here to dive into, and that makes for much better content, right? Like, I always joke with the setup that I have here. It is this converted Frigidaire, I think Frigidaire, Frigidate, I don't even know the brand name, but it's like a deep ice freezer chest. And the funny story of how I got it in the first place is a buddy of mine who was a guest on my podcast a few years ago. He played in the NFL for a number of years. He goes by the name of Big Joe. He's like a 6'8" tight end, and he lived out in LA. Joe Fourier. He played for the Lions for a number of years. He was a professional touchdown dancer, as he likes to say. So he built this thing during quarantine, like early quarantine. It was like his DIY at-home project, like we all kind of got into, right? And then when it just perfect timing aligned, he was moving out of LA as I was moving in about a year ago. And he goes, "Do you want this thing? I want it to go to a good home, and you seem like someone that would take care of it." And I was like, yeah, sure. So first day that I lived in LA, before all of my stuff got here from DC, I had an ice bath. I had this ice bath in the front yard. That was the first piece of furniture and equipment.
That's just called being efficient, Cory. Taking care of the necessities in life.
I didn't even know where I was going to sleep that night, but I knew I could take an ice bath. So we started there, and it's really cool that it is so simple. It's just literally this ice chest sealed with silicone, and luckily I just unplug it before I go in to be safe, just to make sure. But yeah, it's super accessible. I think everyone should be willing to go into some sort of hard thing, some cold exposure. I always say it doesn't, to your point, it doesn't even have to be a full-on ice bath. It could be a cold shower. It could be something as simple as that. Start there, and then you can build. Everyone has a different starting point.
Yeah.
There we go. Well, I feel like the cold exposure just scratches the surface on what you're about and the business that you started and some of the content and messaging that you're getting out there. So there's so much to cover. I love what you're putting out, a lot about fitness and mindset and cold exposure. Take us back and walk us through how you got here and where you are today.
Yeah, that's a great question. So for the longest time I identified, I would just say, yeah, I'm a swimmer. You know, that was the first words out of my mouth anytime I met someone. So that was really my whole identity, where I placed my value, all of that. Well, with it growing up, and you guys know, having gone through athletics, at a certain point you'll do anything to just like get some little return on investment, right? Just anything to get a little leg up on the people that you're competing against, or really competing against yourself, do a little bit better than you did the time before. And that's really the mentality that I never lost, even as swimming is no longer a part of my life. As I go into every single day here, that's why the cold exposure experiment even started. I was very hesitant, honestly, to even share that I did it on social media until I felt like, okay, this actually works for me. So I love looking at biofeedback and how does this actually help me out? What is the actual response that I'm getting? Yes, there's some research out there that says, well, cold exposure spikes your cortisol. Like, it's not ideal to do it before bed. And I was like, well, I'm going to test it out and see what happens for me and my experience. So that's how I ended up doing the before bed, and why it just works with my routine. I noticed some really crazy gains in my heart rate variability, looking at the quality of deep sleep, the REM cycle being increased, my sleep latency, the time before, like when I try to go to bed and when I actually fall asleep, decreases drastically when I'm consistent with this routine. But that's where it all stems from, really, is that being brought up in that extreme environment of, I started morning practice we talked beforehand, Lewis, about your son thinking about getting into swimming and that's what he wants to do. And I said, I hope you don't mind getting up early. I started morning practice for me in 6th grade. So I remember going 4:45 practice, swim for an hour and 15 minutes, and then going to middle school. And I remember falling asleep in middle school, and I had teachers thinking like, "Oh, Cory's so lazy." It's like, no, he's not lazy. He's been up since 3:50 in the morning. Like, there's no wonder. But as that continued to progress, I got better and better at the sport. Was fortunate enough to be able to swim at the Division I level. Had a lot of success there, and then honestly, when that was over, like I said very early on, everything was wrapped up in that athletic identity in swimming. It was like I lost the playground that I was able to experiment and learn more about myself on when swimming was no longer an option for me. So that sent me into a pretty dark place, but now that's why I try to speak on it a lot, is like, just get really freaking curious. And I think I've found a new level of curiosity and just play in every single day. And that might just sound wild to some people, that me getting in a 32-degree ice bath is considered play. But to me, I look at it, the experiment there, and I'm like, I can get behind this. I get excited going into this because I can't wait to get the results in the data afterwards. It's all just a big experiment to me.
Yeah, that's pretty
awesome.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Keep it up, because this stuff is really, starting to get studied, and people are really starting to understand the value of all of it. And really quick, when I got introduced to cold exposure, like I said, it was Wim Hof. I read the book The Way of the Iceman, which is a book that's like written about him, and then actually had a different podcast with my brother right before Lewis. That was when I was going through the weight loss journey, called the Spartan Brothers Podcast, and we interviewed this guy named Lee Ewan, who's an Australian guy who lives in Finland, who's a Wim Hof instructor and does all types of cold exposure expeditions and stuff like that. He actually has a brand called Nasal. I'm wearing his shirt right now, so everyone go check it out. But let's just talk about like the beginning and like how you got introduced, and like what are some of the benefits as you understand it. And one of the stories, we just had a breath expert on, Ed Harold, and just fascinating guy. He has a couple of books. He actually did research science at Harvard and such, and like is fully immersed in yoga and just like fascinating like history. Was one of the early people in the States talking about breath work and cold exposure and stuff. So how did you get introduced? And I'm sure you probably know more about this than Lewis and I. Can you tell us a little bit about Wim Hof and like why people do this? Like,
Yeah. Well, I'll start with how I got introduced. It was kind of not by choice. It was just that like fad thing to do before big swim meets growing up, right? And I joke, the whole point of it is to, in that context, was to like promote muscle recovery and help you feel more fresh and recovered and ready to go the next day. But the way that that works in a hotel setting usually involves you taking that little ice bucket from the room, going down the hall, grabbing it from the ice machine, and then coming back and dumping it into your tub. And you do that 50 trips, knowing what I know
really
now,
quick,
like,
where do you get your ice at home? Because I was just going to ask that. And Lewis and I come from the restaurant business, like we told you. Like a commercial freezer costs a lot of money. Like I mean, a commercial ice maker.
So I don't have an ice maker in mine. It's still a fully functional ice chest. I just plug it in, and it's a freezer. So it just
Gotcha.
gets
So
really cold, and it conducts from the bottom up.
That makes sense. Okay.
You'll sometimes see ice in it because it will freeze at the bottom, and then when I unplug it and it warms up slightly a few degrees, it will like release from the bottom and start to float up.
Very cool. Okay, sorry. I was sorry for that.
No, great question. That's what it throws people off a lot about my content, where they don't believe me that it's actually cold because there's no actual visual ice in the picture most of the time.
So what's the what's the temperature of the water when you go in your freezer?
I usually keep it around 34 to 37, somewhere in
so
there.
So right above freezing, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I've worked my way down to that too, right? When I first got it was definitely...
Sorry to keep interrupting, but just for context, because I think this is important, because I don't think people like understand. So I go to Greece a lot. I went a lot growing up, and I was there one time probably like 5 or 6 years ago in May, and like if you Google like the water temperature in the Mediterranean and by Greece at that time, it's like 67 degrees, okay? So I went in the 67-degree water, and my girlfriend at the time couldn't even go in it. And like honestly, I would stay in for like a minute and like get out. And like said, I'm basically never going to Greece again. After that experience, I Googled the water temperature and then Googled what it is in June, July, and August when I'm usually there. And like 72 degrees is like the rest of the time. And it sounds like nothing, like 5 degrees, right? It's so night and day, it's not even funny. So when I got into cold exposure, the only thing that I've ever done is cold showers. And Lewis and I always joke, and other friends of mine, that I'm the coldest fat guy that ever was, because I was always like notoriously cold. And, you know, bigger people are usually the opposite. They're usually warm and like uncomfortable. And I always wanted to move out of the Midwest. I really just like threw a fit, like just really had no tolerance for the cold. So once I learned, like Lee, you and got me, I started to do like some cold showers. First one was 30 seconds. Like next day, I just added like a little bit more time. The water temperature was the lowest I could get it to go, and for context, it was like 56 degrees, so about 13 degrees colder than, and that's the lowest I could like actually like get it. I put it on the lowest setting and would measure it, and within 21 days, I worked up to 7-minute cold showers, where I used to start with even hot water. I would do it all cold. I would like take my whole shower or whatever, and I would like shoot some videos in it and stuff, and like talk about it. And honestly, like I felt so amazing afterward, and then I just stopped doing it for like no reason. And so the point of all that was 67 degrees, didn't want to do it in like normal conditions in Greece in May. 56 degrees was like cold shower that I had to like, you know, suffer through and work my way up. And when we're talking about like 37 degrees and 34 degrees, man, like that is like insane. So where did you start? How did you work up? And I promise I won't cut in. But this is my last stories about cold exposure. I'm all out.
I love it. I absolutely love it. It always piques my curiosity to hear other people's starting point in their journey into all of this. I mean, I always joke, like, I didn't have a choice getting into cold water growing up. There was grew up just outside of DC, and people might think, okay, that's like a pretty warm area, but we would start swimming outside probably around late April, and it would be hit or miss. Like one day it could be 75 around that time, and then the next day it could be 40. The pool water takes a long time to heat up or cool down, and it was freaking freezing. I remember swimming outside in 30 minutes in just a Speedo, no wetsuit, and it would be upper 50s, lower 60s in the water temp. So I guess that's probably where it first started. And then, I mean, more recently with this, I would say I didn't have a thermometer until very recently. I just kind of was like, it's kind of cold today. It's kind of a little bit warmer today. I don't know. And when it felt a little too warm, I would just plug it in and go based off of intuition, feel, and then just based off of that, be like, okay, if it's super cold, can I go 3 minutes? Can I go 5 minutes? Can I go 8 minutes? Like, what does that look like? And yeah, just been, again, playing around with the different pieces there. You asked earlier too, kind of benefits, why, like how the breathing really ties in. Where I always like to share with people, and like really the main reason why I do this is I'm big on, I want to face stress on my terms, so that when I'm faced with situations like stress triggers, events, things happen to us in life, not on my terms, I'm better prepared to handle that stress. And I'm raising my window of tolerance of what's perceived as stressful or not stressful. And that's exactly what happens with cold exposure and in your journey, right? Of, well, 67 degrees felt really cold at first. Well, you had a low floor of a window of tolerance of what was perceived as stress in that moment. Now you can get in 50 degrees, 45 degrees, 40-degree water, and it doesn't feel as bad. If anything, it probably feels the same as that first time that you experienced 67. And that's what we see in a lot of stuff from the personal training world, right? Like the first time we deadlift 300 pounds, it feels really freaking heavy. But if we stayed consistent with it and set up a training program, we could deadlift 300 pounds relatively easily over time. That's what I'm doing with the cold exposure. It's like, I want to stress my nervous system intentionally, so that when I get that text from a significant other that says, hey, we need to talk, or I get some news about a family member or something happening there, I don't immediately go into that fight or flight and stay there and stay like paralyzed and don't know where to operate, where to go next. So what I'm doing really is training my nervous system to be more fluid and adjustable. I like to use the analogy of cars. If we can get to the same destination, right? If we drive, doesn't matter what we drive. We could be driving a Toyota Camry, or we could drive in a Ferrari. Ferrari's probably going to be a little bit more fun than the Toyota Camry. The Toyota Camry is the untrained nervous system. It's going to have some mechanical issues along the way. It's probably not going to rev up or slow down as quickly as we want. It doesn't handle the turns and curves and stressors of the road quite like a Ferrari would. The Ferrari is kind of what I'm aiming to make my nervous system very agile, knows exactly when to take my foot off the gas, when to put my foot on the gas. It handles these curves with so much more finesse than a Camry would. It doesn't mean that we can't still get to the same place, the same result. It just means I'm going out a little bit more efficiently. So when I'm doing breath work in the ice bath or breath work in general, what I'm really doing is training my heart rate and my heart rate variability's ability to go up and down based off of what the situation demands. So if I'm in an over anxious state, I know what tools I can turn to bring my heart rate back down to stay in that optimal headspace and optimal window of functioning, and vice versa. If I'm kind of just like, I don't really feel like it today, I don't really know if I want to record this podcast with you guys today, I'm just feeling like, I know what I can do to get me up and ready to do something like this. I know what I can do to perform and elevate that energy as well. And it sounds crazy that something as simple as 3 minutes in an ice bath could help you with that, but 3 minutes of cold exposure a day is a phenomenal place to really introduce that training, right? And that really plant a seed into, now you can start to notice, okay, when I first drop into really cold water, what does my breath do? It wants to get really short and shallow. What does my heart rate do? It spikes really, really high. So how do I combat that? Well, we know from looking at breath work that the longer the exhale is in relationship to our inhale, the more we're going to encourage and send signals throughout our body and our nervous system and our cardiovascular system to slow down that heart rate. So if I can work on a longer exhale the moment that I drop into cold water, what that's going to do is that's going to translate subconsciously to those moments in time where I get put in a stressor, and all of a sudden, okay, it's already practiced. It's ingrained into me that I'm just going to slow down my breath, which slows down my heart rate, which then puts me back more in that driver's seat, more in control, rather than letting the whole scenario spiral out wherever. I know that was very long-winded.
No, you just shared a bunch of awesome things. I think something that stuck out to me is how you described exposing yourself to stress on your own terms. That was put really, really well. And, like Dee, you were saying, breath work is very popular right now. Cold exposure is very popular right now. I think people, I don't know if everybody's understanding the true reasoning on why. And I think you kind of nail it on the head in just a few words there on that stress on your own terms. So what made you decide that you needed to do that? What made you decide that you're like, hey, did something tell you, hey, I don't have enough tools in the toolbox to help me through these times? You mentioned you went through a rough time post-swimming. What made you say I need more tools, or I need to sharpen these tools?
I think growing up in that environment, to this day, I hate complacency. I hate being just plateauing and staying the same. So what I notice, like anytime I notice my routines just getting mundane and just going through the motions, I love to shake it up and try to really jumpstart my life in one way or another. And like I said earlier, just being really, really curious about which ways to do that. What I noticed for me post-swimming, a lot of my problems, quote unquote, I thought were as a result of the people around me. So for context, this is how my swimming career ended. I'll tell you how it started at Delaware first to give full context. I was good. I was really good. I was the best.
I was going to ask. So I was a high school soccer coach at Lewis Russell. So what did you do in high school? Did you win state? Were you a state finalist or?
So in Maryland, I was one of the rare cases that I got better in college than I was in high school and had more success there. And I say that because the Maryland area that I grew up with was the talent pool was insanely deep, and I just got better with time.
Pretty awesome.
Yeah, it was.
So you're a grinder,
right?
Huh? Lewis is the same thing. Tell him your story after this.
Yeah, I always joke, like I had a college teammate of mine come visit me one summer. We went to my summer pool, and he was like, I think you're one of the only people I know that has more Division I school records than they do like summer
So that's
pool
crazy. So you
records.
you didn't even make it to state your senior year. You go to a Division I school and you set records for that school. That's impressive, man. That is like,
thank you.
Those are the best stories, because that means that you weren't a top performer just a few years ago, and you had to work. And at that level, to like become a top performer, once you're already against other top performers who have been doing it like much longer, and to like, overtake them, that takes some work. So kudos to you, Cory.
I appreciate it. I don't like to dwell
I know.
on the accolades and all that fun stuff, but
we're asking, and it's fun to relive the glory days. So what records did you set in?
So we're diving into it. I had the 200 free, the 500 free, the 1,000, the 1650, the 800 free relay, the 400 IM, and I believe there's probably one more in there that I'm missing just off the top of my head, but.
And how did you do nationwide in D1 then? How did you stack up?
In my top 3 events, I was like a top 70 for
Pretty
at
awesome.
least 2 of the years in D1.
Yeah.
Never qualified for nationals just because of the way that it was in NCAA standards. It's the top 30 go to that. It's very, very highly selective, but qualified, swam against tons of Olympians at like USA swimming nationals and all of that fun stuff. But so for context, to answer your like original question, like to go from I was riding really high, right, on that sort of thing consistently year over year. I was scoring the most points for the team. I never placed worse than 4th place at the conference meet, which is essentially the biggest meet of the year in college, which is very, very rare. And then going into my senior year, everything in my eyes went wrong. You know, like I got my last race ever was my worst place finish ever at the conference meet. I was like, that's not how the storybook is supposed to end, right? Like that's supposed to be the first race.
Is it
at the
because of
conference
injury?
meet.
Or like what happened?
No, and again, like
Yeah.
at that time, I was like, it was my coach's fault. I didn't have the right training. It was my fault. I didn't train the way that I trained the previous 3 years. I got complacent. I was just like, all right, cool. We're just gonna like coast off into the sunset, and now I'm upset with how this ended. Like,
Yeah.
fuck, no, I can't.
When-
I can't.
When did
Go
you
ahead.
start coming to this realization? Because I mean, it's some pretty mature wherewithal.
It probably took me about 2.5 years to really fully recognize that I should take ownership over it. And
I'm
ownership
38,
over-
Corey. Just and I still blame my high school coach my junior year for me not playing.
There you go. There you go. Yeah. So
I need to step it up in the EQ just a little bit.
yeah, I mean, it took me. I guess it didn't take me that long, but it felt like forever, like going through it. And I was wondering why. On top of that, right? Like, so last race ever, slower than I was my junior year in high school, worst place finish. And then I looked at it in context. It's like I still got 8th, which was pretty solid placing at that level, and still pretty competitive. Still scored points. And yeah, it wasn't the time standard that I wanted, but it wasn't like the worst thing ever either. It was about 30 seconds slower. For context, it was the mile, which is a distance race. To be 30 seconds off, it sounds way bigger of a deal than it was. But then, yeah, that domino then led to me. I was originally physical therapy school was the track. That door shut 2 weeks later. Rejection letter after rejection letter started coming in. And then it was ironic, right? Like the first blame went to my coach and not me. The second blame went to swimming. If I didn't swim all 4 years, I would have had a better GPA and I would have gotten into PT school. And then that took me a while to then get okay with like, well, my career trajectory looks a little bit differently now because I chose to swim. And that was my choice. And I need to get okay with that. I can't be bitter at swimming and bitter at my coach. It just was a recipe for disaster. So long story short, it really started to why I preach ownership and why I preach just show up for yourself, and if nothing else, do something today for you to make yourself proud, is because for the longest time, I lost sight of that. For the longest time, I was in a miserable place because of myself, but I would not take ownership of it. I wanted to blame the job, the failed relationship, the sport that I was no longer a part of. It wasn't until I started taking ownership that I was like, okay, things can actually start changing now. Like, I am truly a creator of everything that I do around me. I need to lean into that more. What does that look like? How do I take ownership of the things that suck in my life? It's uncomfortable, but I need to learn how to do it.
Yeah, I'm not. It feels like you. I mean, you just said it. You spent a long time thinking about these things because you're doing a phenomenal job of putting this into words right now. It just feels very clear that you've thought through this process and you're to the point where you can actually communicate it to people too. That's my sense right now, because sometimes as you're going through thoughts, it's not there yet and connecting into words yet. And then, obviously now you're trying to you're on your way to building this community and this business, and you have we were talking before recording this book, and it looks like you've put this down into some really, trying to think of the words as I'm thinking through this. This is just very well thought out right now, and I'm impressed by your self-reflection here on this.
And this is the Stoic Squeeze podcast, so just in that rant, how many big time points of stoicism did he just nail there?
Exactly.
So
have you ever heard of the saying "the obstacle is the way"? Or have you read that book by Ryan Holiday?
Love Ryan Holiday.
Yeah. Okay. So that's what I'm saying. Okay, this is my next question, because
that was my launching pad to stoicism. The obstacle is the way, and I know Ryan Holiday has a couple tattoos on his forearms or finger or hand to remind him. I need that etched on my forehead, so when I look in the mirror, I can remind myself that the obstacles that I'm facing today, and we're all facing obstacles, that this is the path, right? And to accept it, and this is part of the process, and to accept the process, maybe even enjoy the process, because this is your walk of life. So you put that into some pretty beautiful words there, and I appreciate that. Yeah,
it's funny, at the end of the audiobook, it's either The Obstacle is the Way or Ego is the Enemy. They're both by Ryan Holiday. There's a podcast on it where Ryan Holiday's talking about, and he got the tattoos before the books even had the title, but he just liked those ideas and stoicism, and then they became the book. And he's it wasn't a self-fulfilling prophecy or anything like that. It just kind of happened that way. And for anyone who doesn't know, Ryan Holiday's probably one of the more famous people at this point to bring stoicism to modern society. He has a bunch of great tools and resources and such. And I just got finished reading The Obstacle is the Way. Like we said, Lewis got me onto Ryan Holiday, and Ego is the Enemy. So I always put this offer out. If anyone wants copies of those books on Audible, just let me know. I'll send you a link. And if you haven't used Audible, you get it for free. So that's pretty cool. But where does a young kid like you even know who Ryan Holiday is and get into stoicism, and where did this come from? Because honestly, like you said, you're student athlete, and I guess Ryan Holiday, the one thing is he is very popular amongst athletes, I've noticed. So was it a coach?
Yeah. No. What's funny, I think my first intro into that stuff was E.T. the Hip Hop Preacher, and finding his stuff in high school, the motivational rah-rah, in your face. And I was that resonates with me a little bit, but not a ton. It wasn't until, believe it or not, I'm I don't even say believe it or not, I'm a huge fan of poetry. I freaking love poetry. And to your point of the ego is the enemy, I didn't realize how big my ego was in all of those moments.
I wanted to cry. I just read that book a month ago. I'm I hate myself. This is too on the nose.
Well, I reflect back on that period of my life, right, when everything was falling apart and things weren't going my way, so to speak. What kept me in that longer than, honestly, it could have been was my ego. I didn't want to reach out for help. I didn't want to let my parents and my family members, my teammates and friends know this is actually what I'm feeling internally. I'm going through a hard time, because I came from that place of I have these accolades and I should be I wanted to be the first of my friends to make six figures. Why? I don't know, other than that just felt good in my ego at that time.
You gotta win.
Right? I gotta win. Yeah, I'm hyper competitive. I wanted to be that guy. So
are you the oldest child in your family?
I am. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. I just resonated a lot with what you just said, because I'm the oldest in my family, and obviously there's something to it, but I needed to be perfect throughout my entire childhood, from
100%.
Grades to sports to anything.
And
I wasn't perfect, was hidden away.
I kept score too until my friends started passing me up.
Isn't that a beautiful thing, right? Like you're all about the score, and then you start to see it going in their favor, and you're like, let's just play for fun here. Like, why are you guys taking this so seriously?
And now it's like, you know, I beat Lewis in everything, like literally everything growing up, like better classes, like way better at sports and whatever. And he's just crushing it in life. Now he can like outlift me, probably beat me up. So,
it's like
read more books.
Your little brother when you're playing your little brother in video games and he beats you one time. You're like, well, I wasn't trying anyway, so like
that game sucks anyway.
Yeah, that's not my best.
Let's play
game.
A different game.
Let's play Madden instead of FIFA. Like we were doing the wrong thing. So anyway, like back to kind of like bring the plane back on track. I was going through my first job. I was refinancing mortgages, and it was so far from like what I thought I would be doing, what I wanted to be doing. But they sold me on sales. They sold me on the vehicle that sales could be to that quote unquote success life that I wanted. And I think the best thing that ever happened to me out of that job, aside from the relationships of people that I actually made there, was they took me to this conference in Cleveland, Ohio. It was a customer service conference convention for 3 days. And I remember sitting in the crowd on day one, and this guy in queue gave the spoken word performance. And it was the first time that I'd ever experienced spoken word. And in queue stands for inquire within. That's his whole thing. And if you guys aren't familiar with him, fantastic writer, performer, artist. He's got a great podcast. He's got great books. Like, I can't speak enough about this guy. He planted that seed that, like, really, for me, brought me down started that journey of let's explore these feelings. Like, let's explore what is going on. Like, let me actually face them rather than suppress them. Instead of going and getting drunk Thursday, Friday, Saturday, let me actually stay in and maybe journal about why I feel the need to go and do that so much. What does that look like? And over time, I think that just opened up this rabbit hole. And that's almost what personal development and self-growth is all really, right? It's just this never-ending rabbit hole of trying a new thing, whatever that may be. And to be honest, I don't even know when Ryan Holiday first came across my radar. It probably was late 2019, early 2020. And I was like, a daily book? I've never seen something like this before, but I'm open. Like, I'll give it a shot. And it's almost like when people find horoscopes for the first time. They're like, how the heck how do they get this right every single day? Like, this speaks to me. That's what I notice in the Daily Stoic. Yeah, like reading the 365. It's like, you open it up and you're just like, how does he know what I'm going through right now?
Have you read
very on the nose.
Have you read Meditations yet?
I have, yep.
I mean that's the one that's even more alarming because that was written thousands of years ago, and it's so on the nose, and it's like, wow, like, and that's, Ryan Holiday talks about that, like, besides some like minor stuff, like almost all of it's applicable till today, and it's pretty amazing. And I just read that book for the first time a couple years ago, and that's how we even came up with the name of the podcast. And Lewis and I were both we like talk like every single day. Pretty much, and both didn't know that each other was reading this book, and I wasn't like into Stoicism or anything at this point, so it was just like a random. I don't know how you got across it, Lewis. I heard Sam Harris podcast, the philosopher, talking to, I don't even remember the guest, and Sam Harris asks everybody at the end, if you have one book to recommend, what would it be? And the guest just did it. And I'm just such a random person. I immediately just got it on Audible, started listening. I knew the name Marcus Aurelius, but I really didn't know who he was. Me and Lewis are both huge haters of the movie Gladiator. We literally almost walked out of it in theater. It was when we were 15. And I've seen it like twice since then. And I know a lot of people is that their favorite movie. And to this day, I cannot stand that movie. I think it's so boring and so stupid. And like my favorite movie is Braveheart. Sorry for this tangent. It's like such a like worse version of Braveheart. And I didn't even realize until like 3 months ago that Gladiator is about Marcus Aurelius. Obviously a very fictionalized version, but yeah. So that's when did you find Meditations? And
I think it was through Daily Stoic. I like Rich Roll's content a lot. His podcast is very I would say like, I'm trying to think of the words here, right? So I like Stoicism. I wouldn't say I love it. And I think that we're all trying to figure out our own modern day philosophy. And there's a lot of Stoicism that I resonate with, and there's a lot of Stoicism that I'm like,
So what do you not resonate with? Let's get specific.
I would say from like a emotional, intelligent, like mental health field of things. Some of the ways that I interpret it as it's written is almost like you just suppress it and like get through it. And I was like, oh well.
Even the obstacle is the way. Like it's like Lewis like loves it and
like,
whatever.
my
It's like some of it's like kind of
This
like
is nice.
like I get it. Like go try to like work really hard and overcome this obstacle, but like some things in life, especially if you're not like well equipped, like they're not super easy. So
yeah, and I think I look at my like mental health journey, and that was like the only approach that I knew for so long. And then when I found that there was other approaches to handle that stuff that actually served me better in not just the short term, but like the long term as well, I was like, oh shoot, maybe that's like not the right play to be continually pushing for people. And so that's the one thing that I don't necessarily resonate with, but I also understand like it depends on people's different starting points as well. You know what I mean? Like if, for example, we'll use the fitness side of things because I come from that world as well, right? Like when I'm first starting off on a fitness journey, whether it's a weight loss journey or anything, I'm going to have to be way more consistent and dialed in and probably adopt more of that mentality of like, I got to show up, and I got to show up regardless of the situation, and I'm just going to keep going until I get to where I want to go. But then when you're at where you want to be at, you can adopt a much more, I don't want to say laissez-faire, but a much more like relaxed like intuition. Like, do I push through this or do I sleep in? Like, what does that look like? I'll give them an example today. Like, normally I wake up around 4:15, 4:30 in the morning. Today, I woke up at 6 because I woke up at 4:30 and I was like, my body's really beat up. And thankfully, like being the nerd that I am, looking at my biometrics, I was like, well, when I'm really taking into consideration, my heart rate variability and recovery rates have been really bad this whole entire week. My body's trying to tell me something that I need to make up for something somewhere. An hour and a half extra of sleep won't kill me. It's actually going to do me more good than harm. Whereas when I was originally going through swimming, and that wasn't a choice. So understanding again, like when to put my foot on the gas and when to take my foot off the gas and put it more on the brake. I always say slow down to speed up. That's the lesson that I've resonate the most with now. It's like, I need to know when to slow down and actually slow down in doing so. Because I know, like, for context, tomorrow I'm running 21 miles as I'm training for a marathon. So I need to be prepared for that. I'm going to be doing myself, my body, and my mental health more harm by saying, well, I committed to a 4:15 wake up, so I guess I'm going to get up at 4:15 and power through the day. And then, yeah, who knows? So I'm just going based off of feel. That was another tangent there, but that's
it's good.
why I don't resonate with 100% Stoicism as gospel.
no, I hear.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me of David Goggins a little bit. Like I love
Yeah.
Goggins. He's the
Yeah.
baddest man on the planet. I read his book. I went through a lot of his steps. But like to go hard until you fall apart, I'm not sure if that is for me at least.
Yeah.
Well, this is the thing.
And
He,
he's like
I think
0.01
everyone
of,
real.
like, the world.
Yeah, he's at this point. He's a metaphor, and he even knows it because he tells people like, obviously, don't do this, but like, just get after it and do the versions. And people like everyone. I mean, that's the biggest criticism. Everyone's like, "What are you doing, man?" Like, I mean, come on, you're draining your knees every night and doing all this crazy stuff. Like, you proved your point. We know. Like, calm down now and stuff. And he's like, "It's bigger than me. It's bigger than me." Who's gonna carry the boats? Yeah, just
you gotta love that, right? Like, and I when I first came across "Can't Hurt Me," his book,
Yeah.
I was all in. Like, it's so funny to see my dive and journey into all of these different podcasts, books, and just where life has taken me. But I went through a period where I was like, heck yeah, anything SEAL related, I'm bought in. There was definitely a period of time where I was like, if this whole like fitness thing doesn't work out, like,
have you ever read Tribe? Cory, have you ever read Tribe by Sebastian Junger?
No.
Man, read that book too, and then read like a Goggins book and like a Jocko Willem book, and like you'll go enlist. Like I feel like really bad that I didn't go fight in a war at this point. And honestly, that's probably the most fortunate thing ever for us modern humans living in this privileged country, that we don't have to do that. Because at any other point in human history, once you're 18, 19, 15, 14 years old, you're off to war, sir. Good luck.
Exactly. I'd much rather read about it.
Yeah, exactly.
It's one thing to get that.
Yeah.
I think Goggins talks about it, right? Like being a theorist versus being a practitioner.
Yeah.
I resonate a lot with that, right? Like it's one thing to listen to a podcast like this and hear the benefits of breath work and cold exposure and all these different things. It's another thing to actually go out and do it. I tell people all the time when we're looking at making any sort of change, we have to be very cognizant of what we call the challenge skills sweet spot. So understanding where our current skill level is on one axis, and then on the other axis we have the level of the challenge. And based off of where you fall, whatever the situation is, doesn't matter what activity, behavior, we all have a baseline level of skill, and a challenge that corresponds with that will get us into flow, into that peak state that we get really excited about. The more we can fine tune really and find that sweet spot for us, and it changes from moment to moment. It's not like every time we go into the gym we're going to PR and lift the heaviest we've ever lifted. Some days we might feel really weak, other days we might feel really, really strong. Our skill is constantly changing, and I think that's what I've learned is to be a true practitioner, you have to be okay with that skill level being fluid and adjusting the challenge level to be just as fluid, to really, like, your comfort zone is going to be looking different every single day, and that's okay. The point is you going there and just stepping 4% out of it that day. What does that look like? And see the benefits that come with it.
Well, you mentioned a couple of things there, flow and peak performance, and that kind of ties into the message that you're spreading, I think, with For Every Athlete. Could you get into that and the community that you're building and kind of what's behind that and what you're trying to do?
Yeah. So for those not familiar with flow, the best example I like to give people is NBA Jam. Like, if you guys remember that game growing up.
He's on fire.
He's on fire.
Yeah, like when you were on fire, that was the best freaking feeling in that game. And if you never played it, it literally.
Well, what's interesting enough is like flow state's super real in NBA athletes, and they talk about it like all the time when they get into like when they're on fire in the game and just can't miss. And
I was about to say,
anyways, keep going. I'll let you.
The video game did it justice, right? Like,
I listened to one podcast on flow state one time. Like, I remember nothing about it, and I'm all in. Like, it's the cool. And honestly, I've experienced it many times, especially in athletics and especially in competitive chess. I was a chess champion when I was younger. And honestly, like during a soccer game, like I wouldn't hear anybody besides my teammates and my coach. Like seriously, like it would be like almost like tunnel vision, and it's just pretty cool thing. And in my modern life, I don't get into it too often. So, yeah, sorry, I'll let you elaborate.
What is
how to get into flow for you, man?
Yeah, so first define flow state, and then tell us some tricks.
Yeah, so there's so many different definitions out there. What I would say, the one that I resonate the most in, is just that total immersion in the activity at hand. Like you're just so laser-like focused here, you're present, that it doesn't matter what's for dinner later. It doesn't matter what your wife or your kids are doing. Like you're just here. And when that happens, time can expand, time can condense. It really depends on, it does different things for different people, and that's kind of the beauty of it. Athletes are so familiar with it because it can be such a physical experience. Deep embodiment is one of the biggest triggers that we have. That's why surfers and extreme sports athletes get it so much, because they're deeply embodied in the mountainside as they're downhill mountain biking, or they're catching that wave, and they say they feel like they're a part of the wave. That's what they mean. That's how they are expressing flow. So athletes, what I've seen and what I've been doing with Forever Athlete, there's a dark side of flow. And what that is, one of the dark sides is we can actually get locked out of flow if we only have one way of entry. And for athletes, oftentimes, that's their sport. So imagine if you drove the same car your entire life, and then at 60 years old, you got a new one. It would feel pretty weird. It wouldn't feel normal. It would just feel different. It would still get you to where you want to go, but it's just not the same. That's what often happens to a lot of athletes when they lose that piece of their identity, that primary flow activity in their life, because especially it's this catch-22 almost, right? Like the longer you play, the easier it is for your identity and self-worth to really get wrapped up in that thing, because you're becoming a master of that craft. You've put in 10,000, 20,000 hours, whatever it may be, to reach a certain point. So when that piece is taken away, it's almost like you lost the keys to your house. You showed up one day and you're like, I can't get in here anymore, but this is home. And now I have to go relocate and find something else, and just nothing else really feels the same. So that's what I'm trying to, and that's what I'm doing with Forever Athlete, is offering, one, an alternative identity for athletes to take on. Because when we really look at the terminology around former athlete or former anything, it almost discredits and disvalues everything in your whole experience up until that point in time, which is certainly not the case. But what I'm doing and what I do from a coaching standpoint and from a really community building standpoint is recreating experiences that almost mirror what got them into flow in their sport in the first place. I'll use myself as an example. So I definitely felt locked out. I definitely didn't recognize myself. When I looked at myself in the mirror after college swimming, I literally didn't recognize myself. I put on 50 plus pounds within about 8 months, and I told myself it was because I was bulking, but really it was just, I had no idea what I was doing from a nutrition standpoint, and I was just lifting heavy weights. And then for context, was like 150-ish when I graduated. I was a skinny distance swimmer. I got almost up to 200. I was like, who is that guy? I don't recognize him. And I noticed that was when I was the most unhappy, the most unfulfilled, all of these different things. So I pressed pause and I said, well, what really lights me up? Why did I get started in swimming in the first place? And I started to unearth like these kind of meta flow triggers in my life where I was like, oh, well, I really enjoyed the connection aspect. Like I loved what swimming did for me to be able to open up doors and connect with across cultures with different people. Some of my best friends come from that, and we have totally different upbringings. But because we had that mutual bond in swimming, like we became really close, and then we could develop from there. So all of that to say, like with looking at flow, we see that there's really 22 different triggers. There's 10 individual, there's 12 group triggers. We can experience stuff in a setting one-on-one. If like I'm just getting down to creating content and writing or solo podcasts, whatever that looks like, I can get into flow that way. Or we could get in flow group is kind of misleading. Like if it's just one-on-one or 3 people, like we can experience flow as a collective here. And what's really, really interesting and fascinating there is flow itself. Every time that we have an experience, and the deeper the flow experience is, the deeper this sense of identity is afterwards. Which is kind of ironic because in flow, oftentimes we lose our sense of self. We feel like we're a part of something bigger. But on the flip side, when we exit out of it, we're like, holy crap, I learned so much more about myself in that. So what I'm doing with Forever Athlete really is creating events, creating community that, with those flow triggers in mind, is designed to help athletes, whether they are former high school, college, pro, or they're just a weekend warrior now, honestly, helping them experience flow, not just in the physical sense, but in the relationships, in their role as a parent, in their role at work, whatever that looks like. My message is always around, like, you're so much more than what you do for a living. And if you can really dive into that, you'll never get locked out of flow because you have multiple ways to express it and experience it.
And especially that people identify themselves with work specifically and their performance at work. You build this mountain almost of, when I'm at work, I get the kudos, I get the awards, people like me, all my friends are there, blah blah blah. But then outside of work, you're not those things.
You got the spouse, your home life.
Yeah, and then you're attached to the results. You're attached to performance. Especially me, I'm in sales, so everything I do is performance based, and we're all athletes in our youth. Everything we do is performance and results based, and we have to identify with other things. One of my goals actually this year I do have some results based goals. I'm going to compete in a novice physique competition later this year, but I've added things that have nothing to do with results, just play time, whether it be yoga, practicing guitar, even though technically there could be an end goal there. I just want to practice guitar. I just want to do it because it's fun. And I find that those things are getting me closer to the feeling of flow than a lot of I haven't had that feeling in a long time, actually, to be honest. But those couple of things have gotten me probably the closest thing to what would feel like flow in a long time. So yeah. I feel what you're saying.
There's a saying, the more flow you get, the more flow you get. It doesn't really matter where it comes from. So it's really counterintuitive, but that's the benefit and really the why behind people saying, well, yeah, when I play guitar, I spend time with my son. I don't know what it is, but I actually perform better at work. Like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, there's been one of my favorite stories of a client of mine last year. He was actually my first boss out of school, which was a super, really cool, like, role reversal, right? Like, first boss out of school, and now I'm coaching him, and we're switching the chairs around for a second. He came to me and was like, how do you do it? Like, how do you have this work-life balance, so to speak? Like, I thought this didn't exist. He's also in sales. And I go, let me show you. Like, let's work together for 3 months, see what happens. And we were able to set up systems and habits and routines where he was actually okay with walking away from work and sitting down at the dinner table with his wife and his daughter and spending time with them. And what was really cool to see at the end of 3 months, he had the most sales that he had ever had in a 3-month period. And he actually made every single one of his daughters, like, birthday parties, sporting events. His relationship had never been better. I was like, see? Like, we mix up our priorities oftentimes, especially when numbers and metrics are associated, because we have this one way of thinking, right? Well, how can I show up for my wife and kids if I don't have success at the job, right? Like, I need to sell more to make more money to then go and provide for them. But if we start to look at it a little bit differently, when we have more fun, and actually flow is really more conducive when there's less pressure. There's just enough pressure, but there's less, like, pressure to perform. I like to use this analogy around sports itself. Most of us got into sport not to win. We got into it because it was a good time. We got into it because our friends were doing it, right? And we just wanted to hang out with them more after school, so we figured...
Lewis and I grew up in the Chicago suburbs during the Jordan era, so we wanted to win, all right? I mean, it was expected of us, so...
There you go.
We had to represent.
It was this fun thing, right? Like, rec leagues, age group, like, whatever sport it was, it often starts off with this fun, community, friend-focused first. And then somewhere along the lines, it switches to win at all costs, do the hard work, all of this. And we
sweep the leg, Johnny.
Yeah, like, you wonder why people burn out and fall out of love with whatever they're doing. And it's because they lost sight of what got them into it and their priorities in the first place. So what I encourage people doing now, if they're listening to this, like, take a second to see like where are your current priorities, where do they lie, and I would challenge them that if they were to switch into asking themselves, how can I have fun with this today? What does that look like? Like let your inner child play again. Have some fun with it. It doesn't, even though we're on the Stoic Squeeze podcast, right? And Stoicism can be oftentimes classified as like really, really serious. I think we could have fun in that process. Like I can have fun and get really goofy getting into 32 degrees in an ice bath.
Yeah.
And it will actually impact some other people, which is
I see a bunch of people on social media all the time having their time of the life. You guys get together, seances, burn some candles, and giddy up. Well, we're running out of time here, guys. And Cory, I'm so glad Lewis stumbled across your page. I mean, honestly, with what we do, we probably would have come across it at some point, anyways. And quite frankly,
the algorithm would have connected us.
You're one of the younger guests we've had on so far, and you kind of give me some hope for the future. Because honestly, it's 2022 right now, and the world needs some hope right now. Like, there's a lot of problems. So, can't wait for the book to come out. We'll throw it on all our social media, and we'll plug the podcast. Cory's got his own podcast too, Forever Athlete Radio. And yeah, man, thanks for coming on today. It's been a pleasure, and I definitely want to do this again in the future, and I'm definitely going to be paying attention. I feel like we interviewed the next Ryan Holiday, Lewis. So
there you go. Two things for me, Cory. First, thank you. So many words of inspiration and some tools to leave with. And so how do our guests find you? How do we find the book that you're coming out with, and how does one pre-order for it? And when is your next event, if you have any coming up?
Yeah. Well, first off, thank you guys. I think it's so cool when social media is actually social, and we allow for things like this to...
Who knew?
Yeah, like, it's amazing. There's hope for the future if the younger generation...
You got to use it properly. You got to be a stubborn old man like me who's never on social media and only use it to, like, better yourself. Not compare yourself to other people, find cool people like you. It's such a double-edged sword nowadays, but sorry. Go ahead, Cory. Right.
No, I was about to say, be proactive with it. So I just wanted to thank you guys for being proactive with it and allowing the space. And it's been a blast. If people resonate with me, I'm on TikTok at Forever Athlete. I'm on Instagram at Cory Camp with no E in Cory. And then everything for Forever Athlete is foreverathletela.com. That's where they can find the book. I'm doing an away game, which is basically my take on a 3-day retreat. Doing one in Austin, Texas, February 10th through the 13th. And then I'll have probably 3 more to come this year. The whole concept there is growing up as athletes.
Chicago, come on.
We got it. We'll get there maybe next year. It's not on the docket this year, but yeah, the whole concept there is like growing up as athletes. We got to go to some really cool places, but we never actually got immersed in the local culture. We just got to see the arena and the team hotel. What I'm doing is partnering up with local small businesses, gyms, coffee shops, you name it, and local leaders in the personal development space or the personal training, whatever space of that area, and having them lead workshops so that when people come, they can experience Austin, Texas, for example, for what Austin actually has to offer. And the hope being that, you know, if life ever takes someone that comes to one of these retreats back to Austin, they feel like they're already plugged in, they have their sense of belonging, they have their community. They don't need to kind of look for a tour guide or Google what to do in Austin. They already intuitively know.
Awesome, man.
It's such an awesome concept, and it's really just getting people together. That is I think we need definitely more of that after everything that's gone on over the past couple of years. And some of the other thing that gets me into flow is connection, honestly, is connecting with
these
people,
conversations.
cool
I feel like I
you
honestly get into flow states when I do these a lot of times. So pretty fun stuff, man. Well, Cory,
a lot more to learn from you, man. I feel like, as always on these episodes, we barely scratch the surface on some of your wisdom. So please, if you're listening to this episode, find them. So many cool. I love the material you put out on TikTok. I think it really resonates with people, and it's entertaining. too. So remember, every 5 to 10 videos, you got to jump into your ice chest to keep them.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, really, really a pleasure to talk to you, man.
Likewise, guys. Thank you for having me.
It was a pleasure. Bye, everybody.